Hi everyone, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. Inevitability. When one person goes missing, it's always a tragedy for their family. But imagine the horror that befalls the loved ones if an entire family disappears. And if there are children involved, the grief is indescribable. Matters concerning the life and health of children are always perceived with a special sensitivity. They are innocent from birth. Unfortunately, there are times when these little angels suffer and bear responsibilities just as adults do. A complicated situation unfolded in the fall of 2013 in Deltona, Florida, USA, involving the family of Yesenia Suarez and Luis Toledo. The 28-year-old mother vanished along with her children, 9-year-old Thalia and 8-year-old Michael Otto. Law enforcement officers began the search and investigation into the disappearance immediately. However, the clues discovered soon left the seasoned officers astonished. What happened overnight from October 22nd to October 23rd is shrouded in mystery and defies all logic. Disappearance. The next morning, Felicita Perez, the mother of the main character, waited for her usual call. Yesenia called her every day between 8:30 and 9 a.m., but this time there was no call. The elderly woman grew concerned, as such behavior was out of character for her daughter. Over the next 2 hours, she tried to make contact, but all attempts were futile. The mobile phone of the person being called was turned off. Felicita then called the school where her grandchildren attended. However, the administration informed her that the children had not arrived for classes. The mother's concern grew. Around 11 a.m., she decided to visit Yesenia's home, but nobody answered the door. After this, the worried woman sought help from the police. The compelling arguments she presented convinced the officers to respond to the message. Upon arriving at Yesenia's residence, police officers began inspecting the house and the surrounding area. Soon after, 35-year-old Luis, the husband of the missing woman, arrived. He seemed surprised to find law enforcement at his home and initially expressed indignation. However, once he learned the reasons for their presence, he softened. During the conversation, the man mentioned that he last saw his wife and children the night before. After a minor argument, she packed some belongings and left, saying nothing to him. The family was on the verge of divorce, so after another quarrel, he spent the night in the car. By morning, the house was empty. Toledo stated that he was deeply saddened that after years together, his wife did not even bother to say goodbye. His words were credible. He also gave permission for a search. Inside the home, except for scattered children's toys, everything was orderly. No signs of forced entry or struggle were detected. It seemed quite possible that the young woman left at the first opportunity along with her children. Also missing were her second car, a 2013 Honda Accord, as well as her personal items, documents, and mobile phone. Nevertheless, there were elements that raised concerns. Firstly, Suarez was very close to her relatives. Therefore, she would not have kept them in the dark and would have informed them of her plans or current whereabouts. Secondly, a peculiar smell lingered in the house, especially strong in the bedroom, bathroom, and the hallway leading from it. At places, the smell of cleaning products mixed with the scent of vinegar. This led detectives to two conclusions. Either the homeowners were exceptionally clean, or someone was attempting to destroy evidence of a crime that had occurred there. Thirdly, Felicita's account raised suspicions. She had previously told the police that on October 22nd, a terrible argument occurred between Yesenia and Luis, during which he showed aggression and struck her daughter. Finally, neighbors of the couple, who had gathered at the arrival of the police, reported strange noises coming from the house under investigation. Witnesses explained that they heard something resembling a scream around 2 a.m., but did not attach any significance to it. Altercations among teenagers in this area were not uncommon. Therefore, only when law enforcement arrived did they realize that something extraordinary had happened. On the brink of collapse. Subsequent investigations shed light on the details of the argument mentioned by the mother of the missing woman and her children. Luis suspected his wife of infidelity and had installed a tracking program on her phone. This led him to discover an affair between Yesenia and her colleague, Kevin Dren. On October 22nd, The distraught husband confronted his wife at her workplace, publicly accused her of infidelity, and slapped her. He then declared he would not hinder the lovers further. During the conflict, one of the organization's employees called emergency services to report the incident. However, Toledo left the building before the police arrived. The officers interviewed Suarez, who admitted that she often experienced such uncontrollable behavior from her husband, but had never sought help. Her statements were documented and recorded. After work, Yesenia visited her mother's house, where her children were waiting. They had dinner together, after which Toledo called her. Felicita recounted hearing about their conversation. Luis apologized and pleaded not to press charges against him. He also warned that something unpleasant might happen if she did not comply with his demands. It turns out the protagonist of the story had decided to obtain a restraining order against her husband. But after the call, she changed her mind, explaining to her family that it would only make things worse. Late in the evening, Toledo came to his mother-in-law's house and spoke with the women. He was distraught, complaining that his marriage was falling apart. He expressed his love for his family and his desire not to lose them. Yesenia, however, was determined and declared that a divorce was imminent. After this, he left. To give him time to cool off and come to terms with the new reality, the woman initially decided to stay overnight at her parental home. Nevertheless, after meeting with her husband, she took the children and returned home. Unfortunately, this was the last time the mother saw her daughter and grandchildren. Arrest. Due to the incident at Suarez's office the day before and her subsequent disappearance, the police had solid grounds to arrest Luis. The man was shocked and appeared bewildered. At the station, he reiterated his version of the events that happened overnight. After arguing with his wife at her mother's house, he went to a neighbor's place, where he stayed until 1 a.m. He then decided to spend the night in his car to avoid further conflict. At 7 a.m., he returned home and found that no one was there. Despite this, the suspect remained calm and did not express any concern for the missing individuals. He explained this by his confidence that they would soon return or make contact. He claimed Yesenia was not the kind of person who kept others regularly informed, and the current situation was just a foolish coincidence. A love story. Yesenia and Luis met in 2009 during a street festival. They were immediately attracted to each other and quickly fell in love. However, their relationship was anything but harmonious. Everyone around them was convinced that the two were not suited for each other. Suarez had been through a failed marriage before. At 24, she found herself a single mother of 2 young children. Thus, she was determined to set up their lives in the most favorable way possible. She dreamed of providing them with a good education and a better future. To this end, she re-enrolled in college and took up a full-time job. Yesenia worked for an American canine detection service in Lake Mary, a company known for training dogs to work with military and police forces. Luis, in contrast to his partner, was older and just beginning to sort out his life. He had been convicted multiple times in the past and was a former member of the Latin Kings gang. Thanks to his disposition and well-honed fighting skills, he had once held a leading position within the group. However, after turning state's evidence and betraying his peers, he lost his former influence and respect. Therefore, Toledo left the gang, turned away from his criminal past, and enrolled in college for barber training. He even got baptized and started attending church. Luis emerged as a sociable and caring person who tried to help everyone. After meeting Yesenia, he transformed completely. He became a loving and tender partner to her and a caring stepfather to her children. All the neighbors spoke highly of him. They often saw him spending time with his family and playing with the kids in the yard. The young couple got married on the first day of 2011. Although their relationship was initially happy, over time everything changed. Respect and understanding faded away. Luis began to spend a lot of time on video games and neglected his family duties. It seemed all his attention had shifted to the virtual world. His wife repeatedly expressed her grievances, but the situation would only improve temporarily. Felicita often visited the couple since she lived just a few blocks away. Therefore, she was well aware of everything happening in her daughter's life. Gradually, the number of arguments in the family increased. Toledo genuinely did not understand what was expected of him and why they couldn't live as before. One day, he became so angry that he physically lashed out at his wife. After this, their marriage began to crumble. Eyewitnesses. After Luis was detained, detectives began interviewing relatives and acquaintances of the missing family. They also contacted Yesenia's lover, Kevin. He reported that he had spoken with her late on the evening of October 22nd. He called to check on her, concerned that she might be in trouble after the incident at work. During the conversation, Suarez seemed tense, but she assured him that everything was fine and that it would just take some time to settle down. Sometimes her voice sounded unclear, which made him think that she might have had a drink. Their conversation lasted about 5 minutes. At the end, Yesenia wished him a good night and said goodbye. It was clear that Kevin did not know where she was and was genuinely worried that something irreparable might have happened to her. Later, a call came into the police station from Jackson Tishon, a neighbor of the suspect. The young man lived with his mother across the street and had inadvertently witnessed the events unfold. He reported that at 6 a.m., Luis came to him asking for help with a task. He needed to pick up a neighbor on his way back from Lake Mary, but he did not explain why. Meanwhile, Toledo got into Yesenia's car, leading the student to assume that her vehicle needed repair and they were heading to a garage. However, the reality was different from what he had imagined. They drove for about 30 minutes and then stopped in the parking lot of a large supermarket. Luis got out and started cleaning the interior of the car. Jackson noticed how thoroughly he wiped down the cabin, all the doors and windows, using a cleaning agent. Afterwards, he put the car mats, a rag and gloves into a bag and then disposed of the bundle in a trash container. At that moment, the eyewitness did not understand what was happening and felt mixed emotions. He began to suspect that something serious had occurred the night before. Yet, on the other hand, if Toledo was hiding something, why would he take him along? After leaving Yesenia's vehicle, the men headed back. This time, Luis drove while Tishon was sent to the back seat. The ride back to Delton was silent. Unable to bear the tension, Jackson finally asked what had happened. The neighbor simply replied that he had lost his temper and refused to explain further. The incident occupied the 20-year-old student's mind all morning, but after hearing rumors about the family's disappearance, he pieced together the events and immediately called the police. Later, the young man was questioned in the office and confirmed everything he had said on the phone. He then directed law enforcement officers to the location of the sought-after vehicle and the container where Luis had discarded the items. Armed with Jackson's testimony, detectives summoned Toledo. Everyone hoped to see Yesenia and her children alive, so they hoped the alleged criminal would confess sooner rather than later. Therefore, they informed him of everything the neighbor had reported and asked him to comment on these statements. However, the suspect suggested that the law enforcement officers were bluffing and refused to engage in conversation. Investigation. Detectives knew that solid evidence was needed for substantial accusations, so they didn't rush things and instead headed to the parking lot. The sought-after car was indeed there, but it was empty. However, Yesenia's personal belongings were found inside: her purse, Idaho card, wallet, work pass, and mobile phone. Forensic experts examined the vehicle for DNA, blood, or fingerprints, but were unable to find anything conclusive. The experts stated that this was because the car had been cleaned thoroughly. Later, it was discovered that the garage keys still bore a single fingerprint, which turned out to be the suspect's. In the trash bin that Tishon had pointed out, they found a bag containing cleaning supplies, a rag, and some clothing. Additionally, bloodstains were found on the discarded mats and men's shoes. A wet shower curtain and the same cleaning products were then found in a container near the couple's home. When the house was thoroughly inspected, it was difficult to find any traces. However, experts were able to find a few stains in the bathroom. Blood spatters were found on the cabinet doors and on the floor under the bathtub. DNA analysis determined that they belonged to Talia and Michael. After this discovery, the lead detective expressed doubt that the missing persons would be found alive. Nevertheless, the search continued. The operation involved relatives and acquaintances of Yesenia, as well as numerous volunteers. They searched everywhere, using dogs and divers, but to no avail. It became obvious that the only person who could give any information was Luis, but he continued to remain silent. Confession. Eventually, during the third interrogation, Toledo cracked and confessed to Yesenia's death. However, he continued to deny that he had harmed the children. He recounted that Jackson Tyshawn had come over to his house in the evening to play video games. Suddenly, his wife and children appeared on the doorstep. She no longer liked his games and was even more upset by the events of the day, so she demanded that they leave. But when Luis refused, Yesenia walked up to him and started shaking him by the shoulders. To make her stop, he punched her in the neck. Unfortunately, he didn't calculate the force and the blow proved fatal. She couldn't breathe. I could see her gasping for breath and I couldn't do anything to help. She ended up dying looking at me. The suspect finished his story. The detective then provocatively asked, "Do you miss your children? Would you trade places with them?" Toledo nodded silently. The investigator then asked him to explain how they died. The suspect's behavior changed, and he stated that they were massacred by a neighbor who was present. After Yesenia's death, Talia and Michael ran into the room. They saw their mother lying on the floor and began screaming. Luis therefore asked Jackson to take them to another place. However, he soon heard loud noises and followed them into the bathroom. When he looked inside, he saw that they were lying on the floor and the neighbor was holding an axe. Luis burst into tears. The man added that after the incident, he was in shock and lost all self-awareness, and Jackson took advantage of the situation and got rid of the bodies. There was silence in the interrogation room. The last hope of finding the missing alive was gone. All that remained was to find the bodies, but the likelihood of finding them was rapidly diminishing. The detectives doubted the man's sincerity. Nevertheless, his claims had to be verified. So Jackson Tykon was questioned again. He was immediately told the neighbor's version of events. The young man stated that after returning home from college, he never went out again. He also noted that he had no reason to end the lives of Yesenia or Michael and Talia. Moreover, he personally went to the police and reported the incident. Soon his alibi was confirmed. He was cleared of suspicion and released home. The desire to end it all. The search for Yesenia, Michael, and Talia continued relentlessly. Despite considerable public attention and the large number of people involved, the efforts were unsuccessful. Every neighborhood was combed, including woods, bodies of water, and local landfills, all to no avail. Detectives feared that without the bodies, there might not be enough evidence to convict. However, something unexpected soon happened. During one of the routine interrogations, Toledo asked to use the restroom. Accompanied by several officers, since the restroom was at the other end of the building, they had to walk a short distance. During this walk, the detainee asked for a favor. He wanted to be taken home so that he could end his life. Understandably, he was not released. Instead, Luis asked the officers to remove his handcuffs so they could shoot him as if he were trying to escape. This bizarre request was also ignored. In response, one of the officers asked where his family's bodies were. Toledo muttered that he would never reveal that information. When the detainee entered the restroom, he managed to close the door behind him. Soon, there was the sound of breaking glass. It turned out that the suspect had broken the mirror over the sink and used the shards to slash his wrists. He was clearly determined to end his life and was doing everything he could to do so. But it was unclear what was driving him. Was it guilt and remorse for what had happened, or fear of the punishment awaiting him? Later, he did give an explanation for his actions. The policeman broke down the door and pulled out the bloody man, whose devious plan had failed. He received timely medical attention, and his life was not threatened. However, the detainee's behavior revealed much. It turned out that he feared retaliation from his former colleagues, who traditionally had an unkind attitude toward those who harmed children, unlike their attitude toward unfaithful spouses. Luis realized that if he ended up in prison, he was in for a rough ride. his past convictions when he turned in the Latin Kings leaders, and the new murder charges would weigh heavily against him. This was confirmed by the contents of his letters sent during the investigation. In one of them, he expressed his desire to tell the whole truth, but could not, as it would be used against him. He reminded everyone that Yesenia had been unfaithful to him, and added that he would never harm the children in any way. "I love them more than anything and continue to love them to this day," he wrote. On October 28, Luis was charged with Yesenia's murder, and the following January, with the murders of Michael and Talia. The prosecution did not rule out that a third person was involved in the crime and helped the accused dispose of the bodies. Given his past criminal experience, Toledo also knew how to clean up a crime scene professionally on his own. Justice has been served. The trial of the man took place in 2017. The prosecutor argued that the accused committed the crime out of jealousy. However, he did not confess to ending the lives of Talia and Michael, since there was no justification for such actions. Therefore, Luis came up with an absurd story involving a neighbor. Kimberly Lasanta, Toledo's sister-in-law, testified in favor of the prosecution. She told the court that because of numerous threats from him, she obtained a restraining order against him. She claimed that Luis had previously sent her text messages threatening to take the children and send someone to harm her. At trial, she testified to her constant fear of him and produced the saved text messages. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to incriminate Jackson Tycon, resulting in a lie detector test and searches of his home and car, though nothing incriminating was found. That day, Jackson was indeed troubled by Luis's erratic behavior. Luis looked tense and scared, but Jackson didn't bother to get to the bottom of it because he couldn't imagine the horrible events that had transpired. Felicita and the children's biological father attended the trial. Relatives of the victims seemed overwhelmed with grief and were almost ready to confront Toledo in the courtroom. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found the defendant guilty of second-degree murder in the case of Yesenia and first-degree murder in the case of Talia and Michael. Luis was sentenced to 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. Interestingly, he initially asked for the death penalty, explaining that death row inmates do not face other inmates, and therefore he would not face retaliation from former gang members with whom he was once associated. The defendant knew that there was a bounty on his head and that he would suffer for the rest of his life. Everyone but the defense was convinced that Toledo had no remorse for his actions, but was simply afraid of what awaited him after the trial. The relatives of the victims were satisfied with the verdict. Outcomes. It is known that Yesenia and her children were active members of the Spanish-speaking Seventh-day Adventist church community in Deltona. The mother was studying at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. In spring 2014, she was expected to graduate with honors with a bachelor's degree in human resources management. After her disappearance, the college posthumously awarded her the degree. As of April 2024, the convicted Toledo continues to serve his sentence. He claims that he did not interrupt Talia and Michael's lives and does not know the whereabouts of their bodies. In one of the letters written from prison, he appears to have coded the message, writing that he sent 3 boxes, 1 large and 2 small ones. The large package reached its destination and the 2 small ones were fine. He added that he cared about what happens to him next, but he was innocent of the charges against him. Perhaps in this way, he wanted to let his acquaintances know that his conscience was clear and he should not be punished. Nevertheless, the evidence was against him. Even the fact that he had previously served 4 years for burglary, robbery, and kidnapping spoke volumes. It is possible that he did lose control of himself and committed inexplicable acts. Experience shows that those who embark on a criminal path rarely get off it. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you.